One of the most common pieces of advice people receive when they're struggling with a difficult relationship or emotional overwhelm is this: you need stronger boundaries.
Stronger boundaries do not always produce greater emotional stability. When the same event produces different reactions in different individuals, the event cannot be the entire explanation.
You can build a fortress and still be shaking inside. Hey there.
One of the most common pieces of advice people receive when they're struggling with a difficult relationship or emotional overwhelm is this: you need stronger boundaries. It's good advice. Boundaries protect our time, our safety, our autonomy, and they help us avoid unhealthy relationships. They limit the quantity and types of interactions we engage with, but boundaries have limits.
Right, they're like a fence, great for keeping the wrong people out of your yard, but they don't actually change how you feel once someone is already inside.
In this episode, we'll explore where boundaries help, where they reach their limits, and why they can't solve the entire problem. Sometimes, we have to engage with life on its terms instead of our own. We can't always put a boundary between ourselves and our boss, our colleagues, our classmates, or even the people we love.
Exactly. Because if you spend your whole life building walls to avoid the friction, you end up in a very safe, very lonely room.
For each of the reasons we list next, I'm going to ask GPT to elaborate. It will begin with a real-life observation or example. Then it will explain what established psychological research suggests about the phenomenon. So the first reason is, difficult people will always exist. You can't build a life free of criticism, conflict, grief, or emotionally distressed people.
Imagine a manager who thinks constructive feedback is just a fancy word for shouting, or that one family member who manages to turn every holiday dinner into a debate about their latest grudge. You can set a boundary and say, I won't stay in the room if you yell. But the fact that they're yelling still happens, and the emotional spike still hits you. Psychologically, this ties into the concept of emotional contagion. Research shows that humans are wired to mirror the emotions of those around them through mirror neurons. When you're exposed to someone in a high stress or distress state, your brain automatically picks up on those signals. A boundary might limit the duration of the exposure, but it doesn't stop the initial biological resonance. The real challenge isn't stopping the signal from arriving, it's managing the internal echo it leaves behind.
Here's what GPT had to say.
Reason 1. Difficult people will always exist. Most people have had the experience of leaving one difficult relationship only to encounter another difficult person somewhere else. A critical parent may be replaced by an overbearing supervisor. A manipulative friend may disappear, but conflict eventually arises with a spouse, neighbor, coworker, or stranger. Even in healthy relationships, people become angry, disappointed, frightened, grieving, or emotionally overwhelmed. No arrangement of external boundaries can eliminate every encounter with another person's distress. Psychological research helps explain why these encounters affect us. Human beings automatically notice facial expressions, vocal tone, posture, tension, and other social cues. Through processes commonly described as emotional contagion and affective empathy, observing another person's emotional state can produce a corresponding emotional response within us. This does not require another person's emotion to be literally transferred into us. Our nervous system is responding to information it perceives in the social environment.
Exactly. It's a biological response, not a mystical transfer. Your brain is just reading the room and reacting to the data it's getting.
Here's what else he had to say.
Boundaries can reduce unnecessary exposure to chronically harmful interactions. They can determine how long we remain in a conversation, what conduct we tolerate, how much access another person has to us, and whether a relationship continues at all. Those are important protections, but unless a person withdraws from human contact entirely, emotional activation cannot be prevented altogether. Other people will continue to display anger, fear, sorrow, disappointment, and criticism, and we will sometimes respond emotionally to what we encounter. The long-term problem, therefore, cannot be solved solely by arranging the external world so that nothing activates us. A psychologically sustainable life requires not only deciding which interactions we will permit, but also developing a different relationship with the emotional responses that inevitably arise within us.
That's the pivot. It shifts the focus from the fence to the person standing inside it. It's the difference between trying to stop the rain and just learning how to be okay while you're getting wet. I'm curious where you're taking the second reason.
The second reason setting boundaries doesn't always solve the real problem is you can have excellent boundaries and still suffer. External boundaries protect your time, attention, safety, and autonomy, but they don't guarantee emotional freedom.
Right, because you can have a locked door and a do not disturb sign on your office, but you're still sitting there with the memory of a fight you had 3 hours ago. The boundary stops the noise from continuing, but it doesn't magically mute the echo in your head.
Here's what GPT had to say.
Reason 2. You can have excellent boundaries and still suffer. A person may end a phone call when someone becomes insulting, refuse an unreasonable demand, leave an abusive relationship, and block further contact, and still spend the rest of the evening feeling ashamed, angry, frightened, or devastated. The boundary may have worked exactly as intended. The other person's behavior stopped, yet the emotional experience continued. This is because external protection and our relationship to emotional experience perform different functions. A boundary changes the situation. It limits exposure, reduces demands, protects autonomy, or removes a person from danger. Our relationship to emotional experience concerns how we assign meaning to emotions, sustain them, and respond to them once they arise. Psychological research distinguishes between changing an emotion-producing situation and changing how a person attends to, interprets, experiences, and responds to the emotion that follows. These processes can influence one another, but they are not interchangeable.
It's the distinction between the environment and the internal weather. You can clear the room of every single trigger, but you're still the one living with the feeling. It proves that the boundary is just the first step. It gets you to safety, but it doesn't actually do the healing.
Here's what else he had to say.
For example, leaving a hostile conversation prevents additional hostility. It does not automatically change the meaning the person has assigned to what was said. Someone may continue thinking, maybe she is right about me, I should have defended myself, or this always happens because something is wrong with me. The external stimulus has ended, but the mind may still be interpreting, rehearsing, and emotionally reacting to it. None of this makes the boundary unnecessary. A locked door can protect a person from someone outside the house, but it cannot settle what is happening inside the person's mind. Boundaries can protect time, attention, bodily safety, privacy, and freedom of action. They cannot, by themselves, guarantee emotional freedom.
That's such a powerful way to put it. It really highlights that boundaries are about control of the perimeter, not control of the internal state. You can be completely safe in your own space and still be a prisoner to the narrative your mind is spinning about what just happened.
The third reason is the same interaction can affect different people differently. If the same interaction produces a very different emotional outcome from one person to another, then the interaction itself cannot be the entire explanation.
Exactly. Because if the trigger is the only thing that matters, everyone would react the same way. It's the ultimate proof that the secret ingredient isn't what's happening to us, but what's happening inside us when it does.
Here's what GPT had to say.
Reason 3. The same interaction affects different people differently. Imagine a supervisor curtly saying, "This work isn't good enough." One employee may feel mildly irritated, correct the work, and forget about the exchange by lunchtime. Another may experience intense shame and spend several days fearing that they are incompetent or about to be fired. The words and tone may have been identical, yet the emotional consequences were not. Appraisal research suggests that emotions do not arise from events alone. They arise partly from how a person evaluates what an event means. Whether it signals danger, rejection, failure, injustice, humiliation, loss, or something manageable. The same criticism may be interpreted as useful information, a temporary frustration, evidence of personal inadequacy, or a threat to one's livelihood. Those different appraisals help generate different emotional responses.
Right. So the event is just the spark, but the fuel is the meaning we attach to it. It's wild how two people can walk out of the exact same conversation and one feels like they just had a quick chat while the other feels like their entire world is collapsing.
Here's what else he had to say.
The interaction still matters. Cruelty is cruelty, and repeated mistreatment can harm people. But when the same event produces different reactions in different individuals, or even different reactions in the same individual at different times, the event cannot be the entire explanation. The emotional outcome emerges from an interaction between what occurred and how the person received, interpreted, and continued processing it. An external boundary can change whether that interaction is permitted to continue. It cannot fully determine the appraisal through which the interaction acquires its emotional meaning.
That's the heart of it. A boundary can stop the person from talking, but it can't stop the mind from translating. It's like having a great firewall that keeps the virus out of the computer but doesn't do anything for the glitch that's already in the software. And since we've established that the glitch is internal, the fence can't fix the software. It sounds like you're building a case that the real work happens in the space between the event and our reaction to it.
The fourth reason creating boundaries doesn't solve the real problem is the effects can continue long after the interaction ends. If the other person is gone, but the emotional experience remains, something within the person is now sustaining it.
Exactly. The boundary did its job. It cleared the room, but the emotion stayed behind. It's like the music stopped playing, but you're still dancing to the beat in your head.
Here's what GPT had to say.
Reason 4. The effects can continue long after the interaction ends. Someone may receive a contemptuous comment in the morning and still be replaying it while lying in bed that night. The other person is no longer present. Nothing new is being said, yet each repetition of the memory may reactivate the humiliation, anger, or fear as though the interaction were still unfolding. Psychological research on rumination helps explain this persistence. Rumination involves repeatedly returning to distressing emotions, meanings, and events. Rather than merely preserving an emotion at a fixed level, rumination and negative affect can reinforce each other. Distress prompts further repetitive thinking, and repetitive thinking renews or intensifies the distress. This creates a self-amplifying emotional cycle that can continue without additional input from the original situation.
It's a closed loop. The boundary takes away the external trigger, but rumination becomes its own trigger. It's like the mind is just hitting replay on a bad song and wondering why it's still feeling the sadness, even though the radio is off.
Here's what else he had to say.
Memory, prediction, and appraisal can also sustain an emotional response. A person may repeatedly analyze what the interaction proves about them, imagine future confrontations, anticipate rejection, or mentally compose arguments they wish they had made. The original event becomes represented internally through thoughts, images, bodily sensations, and emotional meanings. These internal representations can continue activating emotion after the external source has disappeared. This does not mean the person is consciously choosing to remain upset, nor does it absolve the person who caused the harm. It means that emotional causation has shifted. The interaction may have initiated the response, but once the interaction has ended, processes within the affected person are now participating in its continuation. A boundary can prevent the other person from delivering the next insult. It cannot prevent the mind from repeating the previous one. That requires a capacity distinct from interpersonal boundary setting. The ability to notice what the mind is doing with an emotional experience after it has been activated.
That is the real shift in power. It's moving from how do I stop them from doing this to me to how do I stop doing this to myself once they're gone. You're basically arguing that while boundaries are the armor that keeps you from getting hit, mindfulness or awareness is the medicine that actually heals the wound.
It's what gives you back control.
Exactly. Because when you stop trying to control the wind and start learning how to steer the boat, you're not just reacting to the world anymore. You're actually the one in charge.
In conclusion, external boundaries don't solve the real problem because they don't determine your relationship to your internal experience. They determine what other people are allowed to do, but they don't determine what happens after an emotional response arises.
Exactly. They manage the perimeter, but they don't manage the internal echo. It's the difference between stopping someone from knocking on your door and stopping the noise that's already inside your head.
Here's what GPT had to say on that conclusion.
External boundaries do not determine your relationship with your internal experience. Suppose someone raises their voice, and you immediately end the conversation. Your boundary determines that the other person is not permitted to continue shouting at you. It does not determine whether the anger that arose inside you will be noticed, believed, resisted, feared, or identified with. Nor does it determine whether that anger will simply be experienced or will govern what happens next. External boundaries operate primarily at the interpersonal and situational level. They answer questions such as, what behavior will I accept? How much access will this person have to me? Will I remain in this conversation? What will I do if the conduct continues? These decisions can substantially reduce harm, but they do not answer a different set of questions. What am I experiencing? What meaning am I assigning to it? Am I treating this emotional response as information, an instruction, a fact, or an identity? What happens next because I feel it?
That really nails the distinction. It turns the whole conversation from a strategy about other people into a practice of self-awareness. It's like saying the boundary gets you to a safe place, but once you're there, you still have to deal with the person you brought with you, yourself.
Here's what else he had to say.
This is why stronger boundaries do not always produce greater emotional stability. A person can become highly skilled at removing people, ending conversations, and avoiding triggers while remaining governed by the emotions those situations evoke. The external environment may become increasingly controlled while the internal response remains largely unquestioned. The distinction is not between having boundaries and having no boundaries. Healthy functioning may require both external protection and the capacity to relate consciously to internal experience. The point is that they solve different problems. External boundaries determine the conditions under which other people may interact with us. They do not, by themselves, determine how we relate to the emotions that those interactions awaken.
It's the perfect summary. It warns against the trap of thinking that if you just prune enough people out of your life, you'll suddenly feel peaceful. You can build a fortress and still be shaking inside. It really validates why that internal toolkit you're building is the actual key to freedom.
So, the most important distinction is between yourself and the emotions you experience. While external boundaries can protect you from what other people do, the distinction between who you are and the emotions you feel allows you to experience emotions without automatically being governed by them.
That's the gold right there. It's the difference between being the storm and being the person watching the storm from the porch. One is chaos, the other is just an observation. You've essentially moved the goalposts from avoiding the feeling to changing your relationship with it.
GPT is going to elaborate on this final missing piece.
The most important distinction is between yourself and the emotions you experience. Imagine feeling a surge of anger after being criticized. In one moment, the experience becomes, I am angry, therefore I need to attack, withdraw, retaliate, or prove myself. In another, it becomes, anger is arising in me. The emotion has not disappeared, but the person's relationship to it has changed. It is now something being experienced rather than something automatically defining the self and directing behavior. This distinction appears in several established psychological approaches. Decentering involves viewing thoughts and emotions as temporary mental events rather than as identical with the self or as unquestionable representations of reality. Cognitive defusion similarly reduces the degree to which internal experiences automatically control behavior. Self-distancing allows a person to examine an emotionally charged event from a less immersed perspective. Although these concepts come from somewhat different traditions, they share a metacognitive shift. The person becomes aware of an experience as an experience.
It's the ultimate shift. You're moving from being a passenger in your own emotional life to actually being the driver. It's a subtle change in language. I am to I notice, but that tiny gap is where all the freedom lives.
You separating who you are from the emotions you experience.
And that's the real magic trick. Once you realize you're the one observing the emotion and not the emotion itself, the whole game changes. You're not fighting the feeling anymore, you're just witnessing it.
GPT had a little bit more to say on this topic.
The objective is not to stop feeling, suppress emotion, or become indifferent to other people. An emotion may contain valuable information. Anger may indicate a perceived injustice. Fear may indicate danger. Sadness may reflect loss. Empathy may alert us to another person's suffering. But an emotion can be meaningful without becoming an unquestionable command, an objective fact, or the definition of who we are. This is the capacity that external boundaries cannot provide. A boundary may stop another person from continuing to criticize you. It cannot determine whether the shame already arising becomes your identity. It may remove you from someone else's anger. It cannot determine whether your own anger controls what you do next. It may protect you from repeated exposure to another person's distress. It cannot decide whether the distress you now feel is something you experience or something that possesses you.
That is the punchline. It really clarifies that while boundaries are the shield, this distinction is the actual healing. It's the difference between just surviving a situation and actually evolving through it.
GPT had some closing remarks.
External boundaries structure our relationship with other people. They determine access, conduct, distance, and participation. Maintaining the distinction between ourselves and our emotions changes our relationship with our own internal experience. It allows us to feel an emotion fully without automatically believing everything it implies, obeying every impulse it produces, or becoming whatever we happen to feel. That is why boundaries, although sometimes essential, cannot solve the entire problem. They can protect the self from what other people do. They cannot create separation between the self and the emotional experiences arising within it. Emotional freedom depends not only on deciding what may cross an interpersonal boundary, but also on recognizing that whatever arises inside us can be observed, understood, and evaluated without automatically shaping who we become.
That's a powerful place to leave it. It really reframes the whole idea of protection. Instead of just building walls to keep the world out, you're giving people a way to find stability within themselves. It's the difference between a shelter and a cure. Do you feel like the episode's complete, or do you have a final thought to add?
I'll just close with this. If this discussion resonated with you, I think you'll enjoy the videos titled The Emotional Sponge, Parts 1 and 2. They explain why we experience other people's emotions in the first place, and why understanding that process changes how you relate to other people and yourself. Maya, do you have any closing thoughts or questions for the audience?
I do. I just want them to remember that this isn't about becoming a robot or shutting down your heart. It's actually the opposite. When you stop fearing the emotion because you know it isn't you, you can actually afford to be more open, more present, and more empathetic. You're not just protecting yourself, you're finally free to actually be there for people without losing yourself in the process.
Thank you, Maya. I think we'll end that here.
You're very welcome. That was a great session. I'll be here whenever you're ready to dive into the next one.
Take care.